My wife called me a pathetic loser because I couldn't afford to buy her a Lexus like our neighbor. Listen, I never thought I'd be the guy writing one of these stories, you know? But here I am, Tom Cunningham, 35 years old, sitting at a crappy desk in some insurance office outside Chicago. My life had become one long, monotonous Excel spreadsheet, punctuated by coffee that tasted like burnt rubber and the occasional water cooler conversation about the Bears' latest letdown. The office was one of those beige cubicle farms where dreams go to die. Flickering fluorescent lights overhead, the constant hum of the copy machine, and Linda from accounting who always brought her weird-smelling tuna salad for lunch. Every day at 12:30, like clockwork, I'd microwave my sad turkey sandwich from a vending machine downstairs and pretend I was living the American dream. But the real nightmare was waiting for me at home. Emily, my wife of 7 years, had been looking at me like I was a broken couch lately. You know the look. The one that says, I should probably replace this, but I'm too lazy to go shopping for something new. She'd started comparing me to our neighbor Jake. Jake had just bought his wife Kate a Lexus RX 350, and Emily made sure I heard about it. Now there's a man who takes care of his woman, Tom. What do you have? A wrench and dreams about a garage. Her words would hit me like a hammer to thumb, and I'd just sit there, sipping my beer, wondering when I became the punchline to my own life's joke. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I remember it was Tuesday because that's when Emily usually made her special meatloaf, which tasted like cardboard soaked in ketchup. But this Tuesday there was no meatloaf. Instead, there was a suitcase by the door, and Emily standing there with that look, the one that said this wasn't temporary. You're a loser, Tom. I deserve better than this. She gestured around our apartment like it was a crime scene. I've been carrying us for years, and I'm tired. Jake's wife doesn't have to worry about paying rent because her husband put his money into a 401k instead of spending it on old car parts from Craigslist. I wanted to argue, to tell her that those car parts were for something bigger, something meaningful. But the words got stuck somewhere between my brain and my mouth, like they always did. Instead, I just watched her pack her things, each folded sweater another nail in the coffin of our marriage. The sound of her Chevy Malibu driving away was the loneliest thing I'd heard in a long time. I stood there in our kitchen, holding our wedding photo from Vegas. We got married by an Elvis impersonator because Emily thought it was romantic. Now I just felt like the king himself had left the building. I spent the next 3 weeks living off frozen pizza and denial. Work became my refuge, even though it was soul-crushing. At least there, nobody knew my wife had just told me I was a failure. I could pretend I was just another guy with a 401k and weekend plans to mow the lawn. Then, on a Thursday that felt like any other Thursday, my phone rang. Not the work phone. My actual phone, which hadn't rung in days except for spam calls about my car's extended warranty. It was Aunt Marge, my dad's sister. Her voice cracked when she said it. Tommy, I'm so sorry. Your grandfather Frank passed away yesterday. Heart attack in his garage. The world stopped for a moment. Grandpa Frank, the only person who ever believed I could amount to something. I hadn't seen him in over 2 years. Emily always had an excuse when I'd suggest driving up to Detroit. He's too rough around the edges for my book club friends, she'd say. Can't you just call him? But I knew the real reason. Emily was embarrassed by where I came from. Grandpa Frank represented everything she was trying to escape. Blue-collar Detroit, grease under your fingernails, the smell of motor oil and Old Spice. The funeral was held at St. Mary's, a small church on the east side of Detroit that had seen better days. Standing there, I counted maybe 12 people, a handful of old mechanics from the neighborhood, Aunt Marge and me. The pews creaked under our weight, and the whole place smelled like old wood and sadness. I kept thinking about the last time I'd seen Grandpa Frank. We were in his garage, working on his pride and joy, a 1968 Chevy Impala that he bought used in '79. The radio was playing Sweet Home Alabama, and he was teaching me how to rebuild a carburetor. His hands, weathered and spotted with age but still steady, guided mine as we assembled the tiny parts. Life's like an engine, Tommy, he'd said, wiping his hands on an old rag. If you don't keep it running, it rusts. And once you let the rust set in, It's a lot harder to get back to where you started. I'd laughed then, thinking he was just being philosophical. Now, standing in that funeral home, surrounded by the ghosts of Detroit's better days, I realized he was trying to tell me something important, something I was too young or too stupid to understand. After the service, the funeral home director, a thin man with nervous hands, handed me an envelope. "Your grandfather left this for you, Mr. Cunningham, along with some other documents." The envelope was thick, the kind of important that made my hands shake a little. I didn't open it in front of everyone, though. Some things you need to face alone. Later, sitting in my rental car in the funeral home parking lot, I finally tore it open. Inside was a letter in Grandpa Frank's handwriting. Chicken scratch that only I could read after years of practice, and what looked like legal documents. The letter started simply, "Tommy, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But I hope I'm not really gone, you know? I hope I left something behind in you. Something that matters." I had to stop reading for a moment. The words were getting blurry, and I wasn't sure if it was because I needed new glasses or because something was leaking from my eyes. The rest of the letter was vintage Grandpa Frank. Half life advice, half instructions on how to properly gap spark plugs. But the important part was at the end. "I'm leaving you the house and the workshop. Not because you're my only grandson, though you are, but because you're the only one who ever understood why I needed to keep building, keep fixing, keep dreaming." The legal documents confirmed it. 1247 Warren Avenue, Detroit, Michigan. The house where I'd spent every summer of my childhood. The garage where I'd learned that WD-40 wasn't actually a universal solution, despite what Grandpa claimed. The workshop where dreams were supposed to come true. I sat there for a long time, engine off, letting the silence of Detroit wash over me. This city had been dying for decades, but somehow it kept hanging on. Like Grandpa's old cars, like the people who stayed, like the dreams that refused to surrender to reality. Emily's words echoed in my head. "You're a loser, Tom. I deserve better." But then I heard Grandpa's voice, clear as if he were sitting right next to me. "Don't be afraid to start from zero, Tom. Zero is just a place where miracles are born." That's when I made the decision. I'd drive back to Chicago, pack up whatever fit in my car, and tell my boss where he could stick his quarterly actuarial reports. Detroit was calling. And for the first time in years, I was going to answer. The drive back to Chicago gave me 6 hours to think. 6 hours to replay every conversation with Emily, every disappointed look, every time she'd rolled her eyes when I'd mentioned Grandpa Frank, or talk about wanting to build something with my hands instead of pushing papers for a living. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was a loser. But Grandpa Frank had left me something more than just a house and a workshop. He'd left me a chance to find out who I really was. Stripped of city life and office politics and a constant pressure to be someone else's version of successful. By the time I hit the Illinois border, I'd made my peace with it. The next day, I'd walk into Mr. Peterson's office and quit. I'd pack up my apartment. Wouldn't take much, considering Emily had taken most of the decent furniture. And then I'd drive to Detroit, to a house I hadn't seen in years, to face whatever Grandpa Frank had left behind. The GPS in my rental car was telling me to take the next exit for Chicago, but my gut was telling me something different, something about second chances and unfinished business, and a kind of legacy that doesn't fit on a life insurance policy. I thought about all those summers in Detroit, the smell of motor oil and fresh-cut grass, the sound of classic rock drifting from garage radios up and down the street, the way Grandpa would let me drive his truck around the block when Mom wasn't looking, how he'd always have some project going, rebuilding engines, restoring furniture, rewiring lamps he'd found at garage sales. "The best things in life are never new, Tommy," he'd say. "They're rescued, restored, given a second chance to be great." Now it was my turn for a second chance. At 35, with a failed marriage behind me and a career that felt like wearing shoes 2 sizes too small, I was about to discover what Grandpa Frank had been trying to teach me all along. The suburbs of Chicago looked different through my windshield now. All those perfect lawns and 2-car garages. All those families grilling burgers and planning their kids' college funds. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't me. It never had been. Emily had tried to fit me into that mold, and I tried to let her. But you can't paint over rust without treating it first. You can't polish an engine that's missing essential parts. And you sure as hell can't become someone else just because it makes life easier for people around you. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, the sun was setting. The dashboard clock read 8:47 p.m., and I was exhausted. But for the first time in months, I felt something like hope creeping into my chest. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, third floor and all, and stood outside my door for a moment. Inside was my old life. Tomorrow would bring my new one. All I had to do was turn the key. The apartment felt different without Emily. Bigger somehow, but emptier. Her yoga mat was gone from the corner. The decorative pillows she'd insisted on were missing from the couch. Even the refrigerator looked different without her collection of inspirational quotes magnets. I walked to the kitchen and grabbed the last beer from the six-pack Emily had bought for her book club meeting. That never happened. Popped it open and took a long drink. Tasted like freedom. On the kitchen counter, I spread out Grandpa's letter and the legal documents. There was more than I'd initially noticed. Property taxes, utility bills, something about a business license for Frank's Automotive Solutions. Grandpa had been trying to start a business? At 78? The more I read, the more I realized how little I knew about his last years. How long had it been since I'd really talked to him? Not just the obligatory holiday phone calls, but real conversations about life and dreams and the things that matter. Emily had gotten between us. Sure, but I'd let her. I'd chosen the easy path, the one that led to quarterly bonuses and suburban barbecues and conversations about property values. I'd forgotten who I was. And in doing so, I'd lost touch with the one person who'd always believed in who I could become. My phone buzzed. A text from Emily. Left some things at the apartment. We'll pick them up this weekend. Hope you're okay. Hope I'm okay? 3 weeks ago, she called me a loser and walked out. Now she hoped I was okay? I wrote back, don't worry about it. I won't be here this weekend. Her response came instantly. Job training? No, going home. The little dots appeared, showing she was typing, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, Chicago is your home, Tom. I finished my beer before responding. No, Emily, it never was. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of suburban Chicago through my thin apartment walls. Someone's TV too loud, a dog barking, the distant hum of traffic on the interstate. All of it would be different in Detroit. Detroit would have different sounds. Trains in the distance, the occasional backfire of an old car that needed work, maybe even silence, real silence that you can't find in the suburbs. I thought about Grandpa Frank's workshop, the big roll-up door that squeaked when you opened it, the workbench covered in coffee stains and burn marks from soldering irons, the radio that was always tuned to the classic rock station, even when nobody was listening. Would it still be there? Would it still work? Or had time in Detroit done what they do best? Worn everything down until only the bones remained? These were the questions that filled my head as I finally drifted off to sleep. But underneath all the uncertainty was something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Excitement. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. Old habit from years of early office hours. But instead of reaching for my phone to check emails, I walked to the window and looked out at suburban Chicago one last time. The sun was just coming up, painting everything in that soft morning light that makes even the most ordinary places look almost beautiful. Somewhere out there, people were getting ready for work, making coffee, fighting morning traffic, the great American routine that I'd been part of for so long. But not today. Today was about breaking routines. I spent the morning on the phone with HR, spinning some story about a family emergency in Detroit, which wasn't entirely false. Grandpa's death was a family emergency, even if it had happened weeks ago. They agreed to let me take the rest of the week off, and I'd figure out the resignation letter later. Packing was easier than I expected. 7 years of marriage, and somehow I owned less than I thought. Clothes, some books, a box of tools that Grandpa had given me years ago and I'd never used, my record collection that Emily had tolerated but never understood. The wedding photo went in the trash. Some things don't deserve to be rescued. By noon, my Camry was loaded with everything that mattered. Not much for 35 years of life, but maybe that was a point. Maybe I've been carrying around too much worthless weight for too long. I made one last stop before leaving Chicago, the office supply store where I bought folders and pens and all the tools of corporate mediocrity. But today, I wasn't shopping for office supplies. I bought a map, an actual paper map of Michigan, the kind that unfolds like an accordion and shows every back road and forgotten highway. I knew the route. Hell, I'd just driven it for the funeral. But there's something about driving to a new life that requires more than muscle memory. You need to see the whole picture. Trace your route with your finger. Understand the journey before you take it for real this time. Standing in the parking lot, I unfolded the map on the hood of my car. There was Detroit, right where I'd just been, and there was Chicago, about to be just a memory. Between them, a straight line on I-94 that would take about 5 hours if you drove like you were late for something important. But I wasn't in a hurry anymore. For the first time in years, I had all the time in the world. I traced the route with my finger, past Kalamazoo, past Battle Creek, past Jackson. Small towns with names I'd heard, but never visited. Places where people probably still knew their neighbors, still fixed their own cars, still believed in the kinds of dreams that Grandpa Frank had spent his whole life chasing. The drive was peaceful in a way I hadn't expected. August in the Midwest. Windows down. Radio playing whatever came in clear. Somewhere past Ann Arbor, I found a classic rock station that was playing Born to Run. Perfect timing. Like the universe was trying to tell me something. I thought about Emily, about the life we'd built together, and how easily it had crumbled. 7 years, and what did we have to show for it? A lease we broken. Furniture we divided. Friends who were probably already choosing sides. But mostly I thought about Grandpa Frank, about all the things I should have asked him when I had the chance, about the workshop, and whatever projects he'd been working on, about why he'd stuck it out in Detroit, when everyone else was fleeing to the suburbs or the Sun Belt, about that business license for Frank's Automotive Solutions. What had he been solving? What kind of automotive problems needed solutions in a city where half the population had moved away and the other half was hanging on by sheer stubbornness? The highway sign started showing miles to Detroit. 50 miles, 30 miles, 15 miles. Each one bringing me closer to whatever Grandpa had left behind, whatever life was waiting for me in a city that most people had given up on. As I merged onto I-75 South, Detroit's skyline appeared in the distance, smaller than I remembered, but still standing. The Renaissance Center towers catching the afternoon sun, the old buildings downtown looking like they were holding their breath, waiting for something to change. I followed the GPS to Warren Avenue, but I didn't need it. Some routes get burned into your memory when you're young. Right on Warren, past the old grocery store that had been something different every summer I visited, past the park where Grandpa would take me to watch the softball games on Sunday afternoons. And then there it was, 1247 Warren Avenue, Grandpa Frank's house. It looked smaller than my memory, the way everything does when you grow up. The white paint was peeling. The front yard needed mowing, and the oak tree had gotten so big that its branches scraped against the second-story windows when the wind blew. But it was still standing, still home. I parked in the driveway, right where Grandpa used to park his old pickup. The engine ticked as it cooled, and I sat there for a moment, just looking, really looking. The garage door was closed, but I could imagine what was behind it. Workbenches and tool chests. Coffee cans full of bolts and screws sorted by size. The smell of oil and sawdust and decades of hard work. This was where Grandpa had spent most of his life. Building things, fixing things, dreaming things into existence. This was where he'd tried to teach me that working with your hands wasn't just about making ends meet. It was about making something real in a world full of pretense. I got out of the car and walked up the front steps. The key Aunt Marge had given me at the funeral opened the door on the first try. Inside, Everything was exactly as I remembered, just older. The furniture was the same, though more worn. The pictures on the wall were the same, though faded. Even the smell was the same, Old Spice mixed with motor oil mixed with something else that I could never name, but always associate with home. There was a note on the kitchen table, written in Aunt Marge's neat handwriting. Tommy, I cleaned out the fridge and paid the bills through next month. Everything else is just like Frank left it. Take your time. Aunt Marge. I wandered through the house, running my fingers along furniture I'd helped Grandpa build, looking at photos that told the story of a life well lived. There I was at 8, holding a socket wrench bigger than my head. There was Grandpa at my high school graduation, his arm around my shoulder, both of us grinning like we'd just gotten away with something. But it was the workshop I really wanted to see. The door to the garage opened with the same squeak I remembered, and there it was, Grandpa Frank's domain. Everything exactly where he'd left it, like he'd just stepped away for a minute and would be right back. The workbench was cluttered with projects in various stages of completion. A radio that looked like it was being restored. Some kind of metal contraption that I couldn't identify. Tools everywhere, each one placed with purpose, each one with its own story. On the wall, a calendar was still turned to June. Grandpa had died just over a week ago in late July. The dates he'd marked were still there. Appointments he'd never keep, projects he'd never finish. I walked to his main workbench and found what I was looking for, or at least what I didn't know I was looking for until I saw it. A framed photo of us working on the Chevy Impala. I couldn't have been more than 12. We were both covered in grease, both laughing about something I couldn't remember now. Under the photo was another note, this one in Grandpa's handwriting. For when Tommy comes home. My throat tightened. How long had he been planning this? How long had he known that someday I'd be standing here, reading his words, trying to understand what he'd been trying to tell me all along? I sat down in his old office chair, the one with the duct tape holding the armrest together, and just looked around. Really looked. This wasn't just a workshop. It was a life's work. It was every dream that hadn't quite happened, every project that had led to another project, every problem that had required a creative solution. And now it was mine, not because I deserved it or because I'd earned it, but because Grandpa Frank had believed in something, believed that someday his grandson would need a place to start over, a place to remember who he really was. Outside, I could hear Detroit settling into evening, dogs barking, screen doors slamming, the distant sound of someone working on their car, probably swearing at a stubborn bolt, the soundtrack of a neighborhood that hadn't given up. I picked up a wrench from the workbench, felt its weight in my hand. Solid, real, the opposite of spreadsheets and quarterly reports and conference calls that could have been emails. Don't be afraid to start from zero, Tom. Zero is just the place where miracles are born. Grandpa's words echoed in my head as I sat there, holding his tools, surrounded by his dreams. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe I was a loser by her standards. But maybe it was time to set my own standards. Maybe it was time to find out what kind of miracles could be born from zero. The sun was setting over Detroit, painting the workshop in warm orange light. Somewhere in the city, people were holding on to dreams that everyone else had abandoned. Somehow in the distance, engines were turning over, coming back to life in the hands of people who believed in second chances. I stood up, walked to the garage door, and opened it wide. The evening air rushed in, carrying the scent of summer in Detroit, barbecue from someone's backyard, fresh-cut grass, the faint smell of rain that was still hours away. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, property taxes, utilities, figuring out what to do with a house and workshop in a city that most people had written off years ago. But tonight, I just wanted to stand here, breathing the same air Grandpa had breathed, looking at the same street he'd looked at for the last 40 years of his life. This was my inheritance, not just the house and the tools and the workshop, but the possibility of something more, the chance to build something real with my hands, the opportunity to become the person that Grandpa Frank had always believed I could be. I closed the garage door as darkness settled over Warren Avenue. Inside, I made myself a cup of coffee using Grandpa's old percolator, just like he'd taught me years ago. strong enough to strip paint, just the way I liked it. Sitting at his kitchen table, I spread out the legal documents again. There was more here than just property transfer papers, business licenses, tax forms, letters from suppliers. Grandpa Frank hadn't just been tinkering in his workshop in the last years of his life. He'd been building something. The business license was dated 6 months ago. Frank's Automotive Solutions with an address on Warren Avenue. My address now. His handwriting was all over these documents. Notes in the margins, calculations, sketches that looked like engine diagrams. What had he been working on? What kind of automotive solutions had a 78-year-old retired mechanic been dreaming up in Detroit? These were questions I couldn't answer tonight, but tomorrow I would. Tomorrow I'd start exploring, not just the house and workshop, but the neighborhood, the city, the dreams that Grandpa had left unfinished. For now, though, I was content to sit in his kitchen, drinking his coffee, feeling more at home than I had in years. Chicago seemed like someone else's life now. The office with the flickering fluorescent lights. The apartment with the beige walls. Emily with her Lexus dreams and her disappointed sighs. All that felt like a costume I'd been wearing, playing a part that never quite fit. But here, in Grandpa Frank's house, surrounded by his tools and his projects and his stubborn refusal to give up on anything worth saving, I felt like I could finally take off the costume. I could finally be Tom Cunningham again. Not the insurance guy. Not the failed husband. Just Tom, the kid who used to spend summers in this house, learning that the best things in life are usually rescued, restored, and given a second chance to be great. Outside, Detroit was settling into night. Street lights flickered on. Screen doors slammed one last time. Somewhere, a radio was playing blues. I raised my coffee mug in a toast to Grandpa Frank, to Detroit, to second chances and new beginnings. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tonight, I was just a guy sitting in his grandfather's kitchen, finally feeling like he might have come home. The letter from Grandpa was still in my pocket. I pulled it out one more time, reading the last lines in glow of the kitchen light. The workshop is yours now, Tommy. But more than that, the dream is yours. I started something here, something important. I hope you'll finish it. What dream? What had he started? These questions would wait until morning. But one thing was certain. Standing there in that house, surrounded by the echoes of my grandfather's life, I knew that everything was about to change. I was in Detroit now, carrying Grandpa Frank's letter, his tools, and his unfinished dreams. Tomorrow, I would begin to discover what he'd been building, what kind of legacy he left behind in a city that everyone else had abandoned. But tonight, I was home. Finally, after all these years of playing someone else's game, wearing someone else's dream like an ill-fitting suit, I was home. The road from Chicago to Detroit wasn't just 300 miles of highway. It was the distance between who I'd been trying to be and who I'd always been meant to be. And standing there in Grandpa Frank's kitchen, I knew that the journey was just beginning. The next morning, I woke up in Grandpa's old bedroom, surrounded by wood paneling from 1975 and the faint scent of aftershave that hadn't been used in years. The morning light painted geometric patterns on the wall, and for a moment, I forgot where I was. Then reality hit, along with the smell of something that might have been coffee brewing downstairs. Turns out, automatic timers still work, even in houses where time seems to have stopped. I stumbled to the kitchen and found Grandpa's old coffee maker had kicked on at 6 a.m. sharp, same as it had been doing for probably 30 years. Strong enough to wake the dead, which seemed appropriate given the circumstances. While I nursed my first cup, I finally took a good look at the stack of mail Aunt Marge had left behind. Bills, mostly. Some good news, some not so much. The electricity bill was current. Thank God. The gas bill, too. But then I found the property tax statement. $8,000. Due in 3 months. I nearly spit out my coffee all over Grandpa's linoleum floor. $8,000? For a house in Detroit? In a neighborhood where half the streetlights didn't work? I laughed out loud. Actually laughed. Nice one, Grandpa. Leave me a house and workshop. But forget to mention it comes with the privilege of keeping the city of Detroit afloat. I could practically hear his voice. What You thought living the dream was free? Nothing worthwhile ever is. After breakfast, leftover pizza counts as breakfast when you're starting a new life. I decided to explore the neighborhood. Detroit in August was oppressive, the kind of heat that made you sweat just thinking about moving. But there was something about it that felt honest, real, like the city had given up pretending everything was fine and was just trying to get by, same as the rest of us. The street was quiet except for a few kids on bikes and an old dog sleeping under a tree. Most of the houses looked like they were holding their breath, waiting for something, either rescue or demolition. It was hard to tell which. As I walked, I noticed little signs of life. A perfectly manicured garden here, fresh paint there, someone's attempt to keep their corner of the world from completely giving up. That's when I heard it. Music drifting from somewhere ahead. Not the usual hip-hop you'd expect, but something older, classy. As I got closer, I realized it was my girl played on a saxophone, coming from the corner of Warren and Preston. A guy in his 60s, wearing a hat that had seen better days, was playing for whatever change people might throw his way. The sound stopped me in my tracks, not just because it was beautiful, but because it was so Detroit, like the city itself was singing, remembering better days when the auto plants hummed and people had money in their pockets, and dreams didn't seem so far away. I dropped a 5 in his case. He nodded, didn't stop playing, but there was something in his eyes that said thanks. By the time I made it back to Grandpa's place, I was sweating through my Chicago office clothes. Jeans and a button-down don't make sense in Detroit summer when you're not sitting in air conditioning all day. I needed to dig into what Grandpa had really left me, and I needed to do it before the heat fried what was left of my brain. The workshop was calling, but first I needed to tackle the basement. Aunt Marge had warned me it was full of Frank's projects, which could mean anything from antique furniture to actual buried treasure. Knowing Grandpa, it was probably somewhere in between. The basement stairs creaked like they were auditioning for a horror movie. The smell hit me first, musty, but with hints of motor oil and something else. Maybe hope? Probably just mold. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling cast shadows that made everything look twice as cluttered as it actually was. Grandpa had been a collector. That much was clear, but not in the neat, organized way that Emily would have approved of. This was more like archaeological layers of a life lived fully. Old car parts mixed with boxes of photographs. Tools from different decades piled together. A stack of Playboy magazines from the 70s that I pretended not to see. I spent the morning digging through what felt like decades of stored memories. High school trophies from Dad's football days. My old report cards that somehow survived my mother's various moves. A box of vinyl records that included original pressings of Motown classics that were probably worth something to the right collector. But it was in the far corner, behind a mountain of old tires that hadn't been round in living memory, that I found the wooden chest. It wasn't fancy, just a simple box made of oak, with tarnished brass corners and a lock that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The key was on top, tied with a piece of twine that had probably been white once upon a time. Inside, wrapped in an old blue bandana, was Grandpa's journal, not a diary. Grandpa wasn't the dear journal type. This was a working notebook, filled with sketches, calculations, and thoughts that spanned what looked like several years. The cover was leather, soft from handling, with F. Cunningham, ideas and dreams, embossed in gold letters that had mostly faded away. I sat there on the cold basement floor, surrounded by the archaeology of my grandfather's life, and opened to the first page. The date was from 5 years ago. His handwriting was still strong then, before arthritis had really taken hold. The first entry hit me like a punch. Started this journal because I've got an idea that won't leave me alone. Detroit's dying and everyone's running away. But what if we could build something here? Something that would make people want to come back? Not just another factory. Those days are gone. Something different. Something that solves tomorrow's problems with yesterday's know-how. I flipped through pages filled with engine diagrams, mathematical equations that were way over my head, and notes in the margins about clean energy and local manufacturing. This wasn't just tinkering. Grandpa had been working on something big. Something that, if I was reading it right, had to do with building engines that didn't need traditional fuel. The big companies killed my hybrid design in '82, read one entry. Said it wasn't profitable. They were probably right then, but times change. People want different things now. Maybe it's time for round two. I kept reading, page after page of technical drawings mixed with philosophical musings. Some of it made sense. Most of it went right over my insurance-addled brain. But the passion in every word was unmistakable. This was a man who believed he could change the world one engine at a time. Then I found the entry that made my hands shake. Tommy came to visit for Christmas. Smart kid, but he's lost. Following someone else's dream. His wife doesn't see what I see in him. She's looking for ready-made success. But Tommy's got builder hands. Builder heart. Maybe someday he'll remember who he is. That was dated 2 years ago. The last time I'd seen him alive. Emily had insisted we cut the visit short because she didn't want to miss some holiday party at her boss's house. I'd wanted to stay longer, to talk more, to learn more about what he was working on. But I'd chosen the easy path. Again, I closed the journal and just sat there for a while, listening to the house settle around me. Somewhere upstairs, a pipe clanked. Outside, someone was mowing their lawn, even though it was pushing 90 degrees. Normal life, continuing while I sat in the basement, holding what might have been someone's masterwork. The journal had more. Sketches that became more detailed over time. Notes about suppliers who were still in business. Even some preliminary drawings for what looked like a prototype. But the later entries showed frustration too. Need help, read one. This is bigger than one old man can handle. But who can I trust? Companies will steal it. Government will bury it. Tommy. The entry stopped 6 months ago, around the time he'd filed that business license. He'd been getting ready to do something, to build something, to prove something. And then his heart had quit on him in his own garage, surrounded by his tools and his dreams. I climbed back up those creaky stairs, journal in hand, feeling like I was carrying something precious. The afternoon sun was streaming through the kitchen windows, making dust motes dance in the air. I made another pot of coffee, Grandpa's way, strong enough to strip rust, and spread the journal out on the table. What was I supposed to do with this? $8,000 in property taxes due in 3 months. A workshop full of half-finished projects. And now a journal that suggested my grandfather had been working on something that could, what? Save Detroit? Change the world? It sounded crazy even thinking about it. I was Tom Cunningham, insurance claims adjuster. My biggest achievement was finding a loophole that saved Mutual of Chicago $12,000 on a water damage claim last year. I couldn't even figure out how to file my own taxes without software. And now I was supposed to build some revolutionary engine that my grandfather had dreamed up? Emily's voice echoed in my head. You're a loser, Tom. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was sitting here, reading fantasies written by an old man who'd spent too much time alone with his thoughts. Maybe the sensible thing would be to sell the house, pay off the taxes, and go back to Chicago with whatever was left over. But then I thought about what Grandpa had written. Build her hands, build her heart. I looked down at my hands. They were soft, pale from years of keyboard work. No calluses, no grease under the nails. When had I last built anything with these hands? When had I last created something that didn't exist in a spreadsheet? I was still wrestling with these thoughts when I remembered I needed a light bulb. The bathroom had been dark since I'd arrived, and I'd been stumbling around half-blind whenever nature called at night. Simple problem, simple solution. Time to venture into Detroit proper. The auto parts store was about 6 blocks away, a place called Mike's Motors that looked like it had been there since the Eisenhower administration. The neon sign in the window flickered between open and own, which seemed appropriate for a neighborhood where things were always halfway working. Inside, the store smelled like every auto parts store I'd ever been in: oil, rubber, and that peculiar muss of cardboard boxes that had been sitting in the same place for decades. I was looking for the light bulb section when I heard a voice behind the counter. I'll be right with you. Just let me finish with this. Tom? Tom Cunningham. I turned around, and there she was, Molly Rodriguez. My first real crush, my prom date, the girl who taught me how to drive stick shift in her father's pickup truck. 15 years older now, but still wearing that smile that had made my 16-year-old heart do backflips. Molly Rodriguez. No way. The words came out before I could stop them. You're still here. Still here. Still working retail. Still fixing things that don't want to be fixed. She laughed. And it was exactly like I remembered. And you? Let me guess. You finally made it big in the city? Got that corner office you used to dream about? The question hit harder than it should have. Yeah, about that. It's complicated. Complicated is my middle name these days. What brings you back to the neighborhood? Please don't tell me you're just passing through to sell Frank's place. How did you? Never mind. News travels fast in Detroit, right? I thought about the journal I'd left on Grandpa's kitchen table, suddenly feeling its weight even from here. Actually, I'm staying. For a while. Anyway, trying to figure out what to do with everything he left behind. Her eyes lit up. Frank was working on something interesting before he passed. He used to come in here every week, ordering weird parts, asking questions about electric motors. My dad thought he was either going crazy or building a rocket ship in his garage. Your dad still around? Still fixing cars, still complaining about modern engines having too many computers. Some things never change. She leaned on the counter, and I noticed the wedding ring was gone. Unlike some things that change whether you want them to or not. We looked at each other for a moment, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just attraction, though that was there too, but possibility. Like maybe coming back here wasn't just about Grandpa's house and his bills and his impossible dreams. Maybe it was about finding something I'd lost along the way. I don't suppose you want to grab coffee sometime? The words came out before I could chicken out. I've got this journal of Grandpa's, and I think he was working on something big. Something that, well, I don't really understand it yet, but maybe together we could figure out. She smiled, and this time was different. Warmer, like she was seeing something in me that I'd forgotten was there. You know what? That sounds perfect. I'm off tomorrow. So how about 8 in the morning? There's a diner on West Grand that makes coffee strong enough to raise the dead. It's a date. I mean, not a date. Just coffee and talking about engines and saving Detroit. I was rambling now, but she didn't seem to mind. Sounds like the best kind of date to me. Oh, and Tom, I always knew you'd come back. Some people are meant for the suburbs, but you've got Detroit in your blood, whether you know it or not. I walked out of Mike's Motors with more than just light bulbs. I had a coffee date, a potential partner in whatever madness Grandpa had started, and for the first time since Emily had walked out, a feeling that maybe I wasn't completely lost. The walk home felt different. The cracked sidewalk seemed less broken. The abandoned houses looked less abandoned and more like opportunities. The saxophone player was still on his corner, now playing something that sounded like hope set to music. Back at Grandpa's place, I sat in his kitchen as the sun set, journal open in front of me, reading the words he'd written months ago. Dreams are like old cars. They won't start if you're afraid of getting your hands dirty. I looked down at my soft, clean hands. Tomorrow, I'd start getting them dirty. Tomorrow, I'd begin to understand what Grandpa had really left me. And maybe, just maybe, tomorrow I'd start becoming the person he'd always believed I could be. But tonight, I was just a guy in Detroit, holding his grandfather's dreams, about to have coffee with a girl who'd known him before he forgot who he was. Not a bad place to start new life, all things considered. I raised my coffee mug, Grandpa's favorite, the one with the faded Detroit Tigers 1984 World Series champions logo, to the empty kitchen, to second chances, to dreams that refuse to die, to getting my hands dirty. Outside, the city settled into darkness. But inside Grandpa's house, something was beginning to wake up, something that had been sleeping for a long time. And tomorrow, with Molly's help, I'd start to figure out exactly what that something was. The journal lay open on the table, waiting. The workshop waited too, behind that squeaky door, filled with tools I'd need to learn how to use. Detroit waited, with all its broken dreams and stubborn hopes. But for now, I was content to sit in this kitchen, reading Grandpa's word by the light of a working bulb, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly. Not yet, but possibility. The chance that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely lost after all. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tonight, I had a journal, a coffee date, and the faint echo of a saxophone playing My Girl on the corner of Warren and Preston. In Detroit, that was practically a royal flush. The diner on West Grand looked like it hadn't been renovated since the Kennedy administration, which in Detroit terms meant it was either a total dump or a classic. Turned out to be both. The coffee was served in thick ceramic mugs that had seen better decades, and the eggs came with a side of attitude from a waitress who'd probably been there since the place opened. Molly was already waiting in a corner booth when I walked in, and I swear my stomach did something I hadn't done since high school. She was wearing jeans and a Tigers t-shirt that had faded to the perfect shade of blue, and her hair was pulled back in that effortless way that women somehow make look easy but probably takes 20 minutes. $2 coffee, she said, sliding a mug across the table. And if you're feeling fancy, the pancakes are supposed to be famous. Locally famous, anyway. Like, people from 3 blocks away know about them. I laughed and sat down. The booth squeaked in protest, and I wondered how many conversations like this had happened in this exact spot. You know, I haven't been to a diner this authentic in years. Emily preferred places with names like the Breakfast Collective, where the eggs cost $12 and come with microgreens. Emily, that's the complicated situation. She stirred her coffee, and I noticed her wedding ring finger was pale where a ring used to be. Mine's named David. Was named David. Now he's just that guy who took the good car and left me with the payments. Well, mine's that woman who called me a loser and walked out with no forwarding address. So yeah, I'd say we're even. I took a sip of coffee. It was terrible and perfect. 2 failed marriages at one table. We should get a prize or something. How about matching t-shirts? I survived suburban hell, and all I got was this lousy divorce. Her laugh was genuine, the kind that makes crow's feet appear at the corners of your eyes and somehow makes you look younger instead of older. We spent the next hour doing what you do when you're catching up with someone who knew you before you became who you are now. Remember that time. Whatever happened to? Did you know that? The conversation danced around the real reason we were there until finally she asked, "So, tell me about this journal. What was Frank working on that had him so excited?" I pulled the journal from my jacket pocket and slid it across the table. Molly opened it carefully, like it might fall apart if she breathed on it wrong. Her expression changed as she flipped through the pages, from curious to interested to something close to amazed. "Tom, do you realize what this is? These aren't just sketches. These are full engineering diagrams. Your grandfather was designing a hybrid engine system that actually makes sense. Look here." She pointed to a page covered in calculations. He figured out how to reduce emissions by 70% while increasing fuel efficiency. In the 80s. Yeah, I got that part. What I don't get is what I'm supposed to do with it. I mean, I can barely change my own oil without flooding the garage. She closed the journal and looked at me with those eyes that hadn't changed since we were 17. "You're supposed to build it, Tom. Finish what he started." "Build it? I'm an insurance guy. Yesterday, my biggest accomplishment was finding a spreadsheet error that saved my company $1,200. You're talking about building an actual engine. You're not an insurance guy. You were an insurance guy. Big difference." She checked her watch. "Come on. I want you to meet someone." 20 minutes later, we were standing outside a warehouse-turned garage in a part of town that Google Maps probably gave up on years ago. The sign out front read, "Rodriguez Custom Shop," though most of the letters were faded or missing. I could hear tool sounds coming from inside, the ring of hammers on metal, the whine of power tools, the occasional curse word that would make a sailor blush. "This is your dad's place?" I asked as we approached the bay door. "Home sweet home." "Well, second home. The actual home is 3 blocks over, but Dad spends more time here than anywhere else." She pulled open a side door. "Dad, I brought someone to meet you. Inside, the garage was organized chaos. Classic cars in various states of repair lined the walls. Tools hung from every available surface. And in the center of it all was a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a Springsteen song. Gray stubble, wearing overalls that had definitely seen some things, and holding a wrench like it was an extension of his arm. Jack Rodriguez looked up from the engine he was working on and squinted at me. "You must be Tom. Molly told me about Frank's grandson. You look like him, you know. Same build, same confused expression when someone talks about engines." "Thanks. I think." I shook his hand, which was like gripping a piece of leather wrapped around steel. "Dad," he got Frank's journal, the one with the engine designs. Molly handed over the journal. "Tell him it's possible." Jack wiped his hands on a rag that was more grease than cloth and took the journal. He spent the next 10 minutes flipping through pages, occasionally muttering things like MMM and interesting and son of A. He finally looked up at me, and his expression had changed. "Kid, your grandfather was a genius. This design, it's what Detroit needed 20 years ago. Hell, it's what Detroit needs now." He handed back the journal. "You know what killed the city? Wasn't just the recession. Wasn't just the riots or the crime. It was people who stopped believing that making things mattered." "Okay, but believing and actually building are two different things. I wouldn't know a carburetor from a casserole dish." Jack snorted. "Carburetor. Kid's been living in Chicago too long. Come here." He led me to a workbench covered in what looked like metal sculptures. "These are parts. Just metal and bolts and gaskets. Every engine that ever changed the world started as just parts. The magic isn't in knowing every technical detail. The magic is in having the guts to try." I looked at the parts, then at the journal, then at Molly, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Even if I wanted to try, where would I start? I've got $8,000 in property taxes due in 3 months and about $1,200 in my checking account. "That's where we come in," Molly said. "Dad's been looking for a project like this. And I've got some money saved up. We could be partners. 60-40 split. You get the bigger share since it's your grandfather's design." Jack nodded. "I've been doing custom work for 15 years. Restoring classics. Building street rods for rich guys who want to relive their youth. But this could actually matter. This could help bring manufacturing back to Detroit." I stared at them both. Two people I barely knew anymore, offering to bet their time and money on a dream that had died in my grandfather's garage. "You're both insane. You realize that, right?" "Probably," Molly said, "but the best plans usually are. What do you say, Tom? Want to try saving Detroit one engine at a time?" I thought about Emily, about the safe life I'd been living, about quarterly reports and performance reviews, and all the small ways I'd been slowly suffocating. Then I thought about Grandfather Frank, alone in his workshop, still believing in something bigger right up until the end. All right, let's do it. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity, frustration, and small victories. We decided to set up shop in Grandpa's old workshop, which meant first getting it into some kind of functional condition. The roof leaked in 3 places. Half the electrical outlets hadn't worked since the Clinton administration, and there was a family of mice that seemed to consider the place their ancestral home. But Jack worked his magic. Within days, we had the lights working, the biggest leaks patched, and the mice relocated to more suitable accommodations elsewhere. Tools were cleaned, organized, labeled. Molly handled the business side, permits, supplier contacts, even setting up a bank account for Cunningham Rodriguez Automotive Solutions. I took out a $50,000 loan against the house. Signing those papers felt like jumping off a cliff, but sometimes you have to trust that you'll figure out how to fly on the way down. The few savings I had and some inheritance from Grandpa helped cover the initial costs, but most of it was riding on borrowed money. The actual work was harder than anything I'd done in years. Learning to read blueprints, understanding how metal behaves when you heat it, figuring out that there's a right way and a wrong way to use every tool ever invented, and apparently I was determined to find the wrong way first. "Tom, you're holding that wrench like it's a snake," Jack called out one afternoon while I was trying to remove a stubborn bolt. "And you're turning it the wrong direction. Remember, Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Basic stuff. I know which way to turn it. The bolt doesn't know which way to turn. I gave another twist, and the wrench slipped, barking my knuckles against the engine block. Ow! See? The bolt is clearly defective. Molly looked up from where she was inventorying parts. Maybe the bolt just doesn't like your technique. The bolt can kiss my... I caught Jack's look and amended it to, the bolt can take a long walk off a short pier. That's the spirit, Jack said with a grin. Nothing makes you better at fixing things than being properly angry at them. It was exhausting work, but it was also the first time in years that I'd been too tired to overthink everything. At the end of each day, I'd collapse on Grandpa's old couch, every muscle aching, covered in grease and metal shavings, and feel something I hadn't experienced in forever, satisfaction. The three of us developed a rhythm. Jack would work his magic with the complex parts, the ones that required 30 years of experience, and hands that seemed to understand metal on a molecular level. Molly handled the business end, but also proved surprisingly good with the detail work, threading bolts, adjusting connections, keeping track of the 1,000 tiny pieces that made up our project. And me? I became the official grunt worker, cleaning parts, holding things in place while the experts did the real work, making coffee runs, and slowly, very slowly, learning how things actually worked. One evening, after a particularly long day of trying to understand why the alternator refused to cooperate with our modified design, we were sitting in the workshop sharing a six-pack of Budweiser and listening to Tom Petty on Jack's ancient boombox. You know what I realized today? I said, taking a long pull from my beer. For the first time in my adult life, I'm building something instead of just processing other people's problems. Insurance claims aren't exactly world-changing work, Molly agreed. She was sitting on the floor, leaning against a workbench, her hair tied back with shop rag. Somehow, covered in grease and sawdust, she looked more beautiful than any woman I'd seen in a designer dress. That's the thing, Jack said. We've forgotten how to make things in this country. Everything's about moving money around, managing portfolios, optimizing efficiency. But at the end of the day, something has to exist. Something has to be built. Is that why you stayed in Detroit? I asked when everyone else was leaving. Jack was quiet for a moment. I left once, right after GM laid me off in '08. Packed up, moved to Phoenix. Got a job at a dealership, selling cars instead of fixing them. Spent 2 years in suburban purgatory, counting down the days until retirement. What brought you back? Molly called me one day, said David had lost his job, and they were drowning in debt. He looked at his daughter. They were living in a 2-bedroom apartment with 3 other couples, trying to save money. I was terrified, Molly added. David wanted to take out more loans, keep pretending everything was fine. But I knew Detroit needed people who still believed in it, people who would stay and fight instead of run. So I came back, Jack continued. Started this shop with money from selling my Phoenix house. Put Molly and David up until they could get on their feet. And you know what I found? The city's full of people who never left, people who keep building and fixing and hoping. Until David decided the suburbs looked better after all, Molly said quietly. I reached over and squeezed her shoulder. His loss. That's what I keep telling her, Jack said. But sometimes the heart takes longer to figure things out than the brain. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the radio playing softly, the late Detroit summer evening settling around us like a familiar blanket. I thought about all the choices that had led me to this moment. Emily's ultimatum, Grandpa's death, the decision to stay instead of sell. You know what's crazy? I said finally. A month ago, I was sitting in a cubicle, wondering why my life felt so empty. Now I'm up to my elbows in engine parts. Probably about to lose my house, and I haven't felt this alive in years. That's because you're finally doing what you were meant to do, Molly said. She stood up, walked over, and before I knew what was happening, she was wiping grease off my cheek with her thumb. Frank always said you had the hands of a builder. You just forgot how to use them. I looked into her eyes, dark brown, with flecks of gold that caught the workshop lights, and everything else faded away. The music, Jack's presence, the half-built engine, the mountain of problems we still had to solve. It was just her and me and this moment that felt like it had been waiting 15 years to happen. I was about to lean in when Jack's voice cut through the moment. "Hey, Romeo, if you're done making eyes at my daughter, this camshaft isn't going to install itself." Molly laughed and stepped back, but not before giving my hand a quick squeeze. "Back to work, engine boy. We've got a city to save." The next week was a blur of 14-hour days, trial and error, and slow progress. Our hybrid engine was starting to take shape, each piece fitting into the next like a mechanical puzzle designed by my grandfather's dream-addled brain. I was getting better at the work, my hands remembering skills I didn't know I had, muscle memory from all those summers helping Grandpa, lying dormant for decades, suddenly waking up when I needed it. I could read blueprints now, understand why certain parts needed to be in certain places, even suggest modifications that sometimes actually worked. "You're a natural," Molly told me one afternoon while we were calibrating the fuel injection system. "Dad hasn't stopped talking about how quickly you're picking this up." "He talks about me?" "Well, when he's not complaining about your coffee. Apparently you make it too weak. I can't make it strong enough for Jack. He likes coffee that could double as paint thinner." She laughed, that sound that was becoming my favorite part of every day. "He likes you, Tom. Really likes you. And not just because you're helping with the engine. He sees something in you. We both do. What do you see?" The question came out before I could stop it, but I realized I really wanted to know. She was quiet for a moment, focusing on adjusting a gauge. "I see the Tom I remember from high school, the one who could fix anything, who always had a plan, who made everything seem possible. But I also see someone who's been lost for a while and is just starting to find his way back. And that's a good thing. That's the best thing." She looked up at me. "Being lost isn't the problem, Tom. Staying lost is. You're not staying lost anymore." That night, after Jack went home and Molly headed back to her apartment, I sat alone in the workshop, looking at what we'd built so far. It was just the beginning, pistons and cylinders, a modified crankshaft, the skeleton of something that might one day become an engine that could change the world. But it was more than that. It was proof that dreams don't die just because the person who dreamed them is gone. It was evidence that sometimes the right team can make impossible things happen. It was hope assembled from spare parts and stubbornness. I picked up Grandpa's journal, reading the last entry he'd written. "Life is like a wrench, Tommy. If you're not turning something, if you're not trying to change something, you're just dead weight." Well, Grandpa, I thought, I'm turning things now. Bolts and screws in my whole life. And for the first time in years, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The radio was still playing, softly now, some old blues song about second chances and lost loves. Outside, Detroit was settling into another night. Streetlights flickering on in patterns that told the story of a city that refused to quit. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Always did in Detroit. But tonight, in Grandpa's workshop, surrounded by the pieces of his dream and the beginning of something that might be mine too, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt ready. Ready for whatever was coming. Ready to take risks again. Ready to believe that maybe, just maybe, the best parts of my life were still ahead of me. And as I locked up the workshop and walked home through the warm August night, I couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was coming. Not a literal storm, although Detroit summers were known for those too, but something else. Something that would test everything we were building, everything we were becoming. But for now, I had a team. I had a plan. I had a purpose. And in Detroit, that was more than enough to face whatever was coming next. The day we finally got the engine running was like watching a miracle happen in slow motion. 3 months of 14-hour days, bloody knuckles, and enough coffee to float a battleship finally paid off. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then settled into a purr that sounded like music. Holy hell, we did it! Jack shouted over the noise, his face split by a grin that probably hadn't been there since the GM days. Molly was bouncing on her toes, her eyes shining with excitement. And me? I just stood there, wrench in hand, watching our creation breathe life for the first time. We built something that could run on traditional gas, ethanol, or even waste vegetable oil. The emissions were a fraction of a normal engine, and the efficiency ratings were off the charts. Most importantly, every single part had been sourced locally from shops in Detroit that had been hanging on by their fingernails for years. That night, we celebrated at Jack's place with beer and the kind of junk food that only tastes good when you've earned it. Molly sat next to me on Jack's ancient couch, her hand somehow finding mine during one of Jack's stories about the glory days of Detroit manufacturing. It felt natural, right, like something that had been waiting to happen for a long time. "You know what's crazy?" she said after Jack went to grab more beer from the garage. "I haven't felt this excited about anything in years. Like we're actually making a difference." Me neither, I admitted. Even with all the stress and the late nights, I can't remember feeling this alive since we were 17 and thought we could change the world. She smiled. "Well, maybe we're finally doing it." Before I could overthink it, I leaned in and kissed her. Just a soft, quick kiss that tasted like Miller Lite and possibility. When I pulled back, she was smiling even wider. About time, Jack called from the doorway, making us both jump. I was wondering how long you two were going to dance around this. But that euphoria lasted exactly 12 hours. The next morning, I stumbled into the workshop expecting to find Jack already working, but instead found him standing by the workbench, holding an envelope and looking like someone had just told him his dog died. "What's wrong?" I asked, suddenly very awake. "Letter from Detroit Automotive Holdings. Remember that supplier I called last week about sourcing some specialized parts? Turns out they're connected to some former GM executives who got squeezed out during the bankruptcy." Jack handed me the letter. "They're claiming our design infringes on a patent they filed back in '82. I read the legal jargon twice before it sank in. They weren't just threatening to sue. They were demanding we cease all work immediately and turn over our prototypes to them for evaluation. The letter ended with a barely veiled threat about how expensive legal battles could get for small operations. "This is bullshit," I said, finally finding my voice. "Grandpa was working on this design in the '80s. These guys probably stole it from him in the first place." "Probably. But proving it means lawyers, and lawyers mean money we don't have." Jack slumped onto a stool. "I've seen this before, kid. Big fish eating small fish. It's how Detroit works." That's when my phone rang. The bank. My stomach dropped even before I answered. The conversation was short and brutal. I was 3 weeks behind on the loan payment. They wanted the full amount by end of business Friday, or they'd start foreclosure proceedings on Monday. The house, the workshop, everything Grandpa had left me. It could all be gone in a week. I hung up and just sat there, feeling like the universe was playing some cosmic joke. We'd done the impossible, built something that could actually make a difference. And now it was all going to disappear because of paperwork, money, and corporate bullies. "How bad?" Molly asked. She'd arrived during my disaster of a phone call and caught the tail end of my meltdown. "Bad enough that I'm looking at losing everything. Again." I picked up Grandpa's old wrench from the workbench. "I can't let him down, Molly. Not like this. He spent 30 years believing in something, and I finally understand what he was trying to do. I can't just give up." "Then we don't give up," she said, grabbing my other hand. "We fight." That afternoon, Molly suggested something that seemed crazy at first, but started making sense the more we talked about it. We needed publicity, not just the press, but the kind of viral internet fame that could put pressure on both the bank and Detroit Automotive Holdings. "My cousin works at the Detroit Free Press," she said. "He's been looking for stories about small businesses trying to revitalize the city. What if we tell him everything? The threats, the loan problems, the whole David versus Goliath situation?" The reporter, Mike Chun, arrived the next day and spent 4 hours interviewing us, photographing the workshop, documenting our engine's test runs. He was particularly interested in the local supplier angle, how we kept everything in Detroit when everyone else was outsourcing. The article hit the web on Wednesday with the headline, "Detroit Underdogs Build Green Engine, Face Corporate Intimidation." By Thursday morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. News stations, podcasts, random people offering support. Our tiny workshop email got flooded with messages from all over the country. But the call that changed everything came Friday afternoon, just hours before my deadline with the bank. Tom Cunningham, this is Marcus Williams, VP of Advanced Development at GM. I worked with Jack back in the day, and I just read Mike Chen's article. I'm intrigued by your engine design. Would you and your team be available for a meeting next week? I nearly dropped the phone. Jack's eyes went wide when I told him, Marcus Williams wants to meet with us? That's not just good, Tom. That's miracle level good. But first, we had to survive the weekend. The bank had called with a 1-week extension, probably thanks to all the media attention. Detroit Automotive Holdings had gone suspiciously quiet. We used the time to prepare for the meeting, test the engine more thoroughly, and document everything we could think of. Through it all, Molly and I kept gravitating toward each other, working side by side, catching each other's eyes across the workshop, finding excuses to brush hands when reaching for the same tool. That first kiss had opened something between us, but we were both too focused on saving our project to fully explore it. This is crazy, isn't it? She asked one night as we stayed late to prepare for the GM meeting. All of it. The craziest. I agreed, but good crazy. Like, finally doing what we're supposed to be doing crazy. Yeah, she said, moving closer to look at the blueprint I was reviewing. Exactly that kind of crazy. When she leaned against me, just slightly, I put my arm around her shoulders. Natural as breathing, like we'd been doing it for years instead of days. Tom, she said quietly. Yeah. Don't let me screw this up. Which part? The engine or us? Either. Both. She looked up at me. I haven't felt this way about someone in, well, ever. And I know it's terrible timing with everything else going on, but I kissed her again. Longer this time, like I was trying to tell her everything I couldn't find words for. When we broke apart, she was smiling. We're not going to screw this up, I said. Either part. The GM meeting was set for the following Tuesday. We spent Sunday at Jack's place, going over our presentation for the 100th time. Jack was nervous, which made me nervous. Molly was making lists of everything that could go wrong, which made everyone nervous. Relax, Jack finally said, opening another beer. We've built something good, something that matters. Williams knows quality when he sees it. Easy for you to say. I replied, you've done this before. And look how that turned out. He gestured around his aging kitchen. I got laid off and spent 2 years selling used cars in Phoenix before crawling back here. Yeah, but this is different, Molly said. This time we're coming to them with something they need, not begging for jobs. That's the spirit. Jack raised his beer. To not begging. To not screwing up, I added. To being too stubborn to fail, Molly finished. Tuesday morning arrived too soon and too slowly at the same time. We loaded our prototype engine into Jack's truck with the kind of care usually reserved for premature babies or Nobel Prize acceptance speeches. The GM Technical Center in Warren looked even more impressive than I remembered, all glass and steel, and that quiet hum of serious money being spent on serious things. Williams met us in the lobby, exactly like his phone presence, confident, sharp, missing nothing. He led us to a workshop that made ours look like a kid's treehouse, filled with equipment I couldn't begin to identify. Let's see what you've built, he said simply. Setting up our engine took 20 minutes. I was sweating to my best, only dress shirt, but Jack moved with practiced efficiency, explaining each component to the waiting GM engineers. Molly handled the documentation, while fielding technical questions that proved she'd been paying attention to a lot more than just parts ordering. When we fired up the engine, the room went quiet. The GM engineers exchanged looks I couldn't read. William stood with his arms crossed, his expression carefully neutral. Impressive, he said finally. Very impressive. The efficiency numbers you're showing. We've been trying to achieve these for years. My grandfather started working on this design in the 80s, I said. Everything you're seeing is built on his foundation, and you've improved on his designs considerably. Williams walked around the engine, examining it from every angle. Local suppliers for everything. Everything except 3 components that aren't manufactured in the U.S. anymore, Molly confirmed. We're working on solutions for those. Williams nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Cunningham, Ms. Rodriguez, Mr. Rodriguez. GM would like to discuss licensing your technology. Not buy outright, but entering into a partnership that would allow us to develop this for mass production while keeping the core operation here in Detroit. I looked at Jack, then at Molly. Jack's eyes were wide. Molly was biting her lip to keep from smiling too big. What are we talking about? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Initial licensing fee of $5 million, plus 6% royalties on every unit produced. We'd handle all legal issues with Detroit Automotive Holdings, and you'd work with us as consultants on the development process. The room started spinning a little. $5 million. Enough to save the house, pay off all our debts, expand our operation, and actually breathe for the first time in months. There's one more thing, Williams continued. We want to document this partnership. The story of bringing manufacturing innovation back to Detroit. What your grandfather started and what you're finishing. Are you interested? I looked at Molly, who nodded slightly, then at Jack, who was grinning like he'd just won the lottery, which, in a way, we all had. When do we start? I asked. The next 2 months were a blur of lawyers, contracts, and champagne we couldn't afford to refuse. The Detroit Automotive Holdings lawsuit evaporated overnight. Apparently, GM's legal team was very persuasive. The house was saved, the loan paid off, and suddenly we had enough money to worry about things like taxes and investment strategies instead of whether we could afford groceries. More importantly, we had validation. Real, corporate, Fortune 500 validation that what we'd built mattered. That Grandpa's dream wasn't just the ramblings of an old mechanic. That Detroit still had something valuable to offer the world. Through it all, Molly and I found ourselves settling into something deeper than just crisis bonding. Real dates started happening. Dinner, movies, long walks through Belle, where we'd talk about everything and nothing. She kept a spare set of clothes at my place. I had a drawer at hers. Her toothbrush appeared in my bathroom without discussion. Is this weird? She asked one night after we'd spent the day working with GM engineers and came home to cook dinner together in what was increasingly becoming our kitchen. Which part? All of it. The work, the money, us. 6 months ago, I was selling battery cables to teenagers with their first cars. And I was calculating actuarial tables in a beige cube farm. I handed her a glass of wine. If this is weird, I never want to be normal again. Good answer. She clinked her glass against mine. Though I do have one concern. What's that? You still owe me that Mustang ride you promised in high school. Give me a few weeks with this new budget. I might be able to upgrade that promise. It was another month before I found the courage to address the elephant in the room. Not money, not work, not even our growing closeness, but the future, the capital F future that we kept dancing around. I spent weeks working on something in the workshop whenever Molly wasn't around. A ring, but not just any ring. I commissioned a local jeweler to create something from steel weed salvaged from our first prototype, incorporating a small diamond that caught the light like machine oil in the morning sun. On a quiet Saturday in October, when the Detroit autumn was painting everything in shades of rust and gold, I found my moment. We were in the workshop, working side by side on some modifications GM had requested. The radio was playing softly, classic rock, as always, and the afternoon light was filtering through the high windows, making the metal shavings on our workbench look like confetti. Molly, I said, setting down my wrench. She didn't look up from the carburetor she was disassembling, hair falling across her face, the tip of her tongue visible as she concentrated. I love you. That got her attention. She looked up, a wrench in her greasy hand, eyebrow raised. I love you too, weirdo. Is this going somewhere, or are you having a moment? I'm having a moment. I pulled the ring box from my pocket, my heart doing things that probably violated several laws of physics. And I'm hoping you'll have it with me. She stared at the box like it might explode, then looked at her greasy hands, then back at the box. Tom Cunningham, are you seriously proposing to me while I'm elbow deep in car parts? I am, because this is us. This is who we are, covered in grease, building things together, making dreams real in the most beautiful workshop in Detroit. I open the box. It's not conventional. It's made from steel from our first engine, the one that started everything. I figured if we're going to build a life together, it should be built on the same foundation as everything else we created. She was quiet for a long moment, looking from the ring to me and back again. Then she started laughing. Only you, she said, would make a proposal romantic by referencing metallurgy. Is that a yes? That's a, let me wash my hands first, you beautiful idiot. She headed to the sink, scrubbing her hands while talking over her shoulder. But yes, obviously yes. I've been waiting for you to get your act together since we were 17. When she came back, hands clean, I slipped the ring onto her finger. It caught the light and threw tiny rainbows across the workshop ceiling. Perfect fit, she said, admiring it. Just like us. Now that's the cheesiest thing you've said all day. She kissed me, slow and sweet and tasting like coffee and forever, but I'll allow it. The wedding happened the following spring, in Palmer Park, the same place where we'd skipped school senior year to race my old Chevy. Nothing fancy, just family, friends, the workshop crew, and half the neighborhood. Jack walked Molly down a makeshift aisle, grumbling the whole way about losing his daughter to some insurance guy who still can't properly gap a spark plug. Former insurance guy. I corrected when he got close enough. Still can't gap a spark plug, he muttered back, but he was smiling. When the part came for rings, we exchanged the ones we designed together. Hers the delicate one made from our prototype steel. Mine a heavy-duty band that matched the tools in our shop. Simple, practical, unbreakable. I promise, I said, sliding the ring onto her finger, to always work on our relationship with the same attention I give to the stubborn engine, to never give up when things get complicated, to always remember that the best things are built slowly, and to keep my hands dirty for as long as you'll have me. I promise, she replied, to keep building dreams with you, even when they seem impossible, to never let either of us forget who we are or where we came from, and to always remind you to torque your bolts in the proper sequence. You may kiss the bride, the officiant said, grinning. About damn time, Jack shouted from the crowd, getting a laugh from everyone. The reception was in Jack's backyard, featuring barbecue, beer, and a playlist that somehow seamlessly mixed Motown with Tom Petty, with whatever the younger crowd was streaming. At some point, Jack grabbed the microphone to make a toast. When Tom first showed up with Frank's journal, he began, I thought he was just another suburbanite with big dreams and soft hands. But you know what? Frank was right. His grandson has the heart of a builder. And my daughter, he looked at Molly, his voice softening. My daughter has always known how to see the best in people. He raised his beer. To Tom and Molly, who proved that the best engines are always built by teams. To Frank, who started something worth finishing. And to Detroit, which still knows how to make miracles when nobody's looking. 6 months after the wedding, on a crisp November morning, Emily drove past our workshop. I was outside, unloading a delivery of parts, when her familiar silver sedan slowed and then stopped. She rolled down the window, and for a moment we just looked at each other. She looked good, polished, put together, expensive, everything I remembered and nothing I wanted anymore. Tom, she said, her voice carrying that same tone I'd heard 1,000 times. I heard about your success. The GM deal, everything. I wanted to congratulate you. Thanks, Emily. I appreciate that. I also want to apologize for everything I said, the way I left. I've done a lot of thinking since then. I set down the box of parts one was carrying. It's okay. Really, we both needed to find our own paths. But look at what you've built here. The business, the workshop, the life. She gestured vaguely at the building behind me. This is everything I thought I wanted us to have. No, I said gently. This is everything you thought would look good from the outside. Big difference. She was quiet for a moment. I suppose you're right. She looked at my wedding ring, barely visible past the grease on my hands. I saw the pictures from your wedding. Molly looks happy. She is. We are. Good. She put the car in gear. I'm happy for you, Tom. I really am. I hope you both get everything you want. After she drove away, I stood there for a moment, thinking about parallel universes and paths not taken, about how sometimes the best thing that happens to you is the thing that feels like the worst at the time. Who was that? Molly asked, appearing at my elbow with 2 cups of coffee. Just someone saying goodbye. For real this time? For real this time. I took the coffee gratefully. Thanks. For the coffee or for not freaking out about your ex stopping by? Both. Definitely both. That winter, we opened Cunningham Rodriguez Auto, a full-service garage and custom shop in the building next to our original workshop. We hired 12 people, all former auto workers who'd been laid off and forgotten by the system that had once made Detroit the industrial capital of the world. The neighborhood kept changing, slowly but surely. Where there had been empty lots, small businesses appeared. The auto parts store expanded. Someone opened a craft brewery in an old pharmacy. The street corner where I'd first heard that saxophone player now featured a small stage where local musicians performed on weekend evenings. We're not saving Detroit, Molly said one evening as we walked home through our neighborhood, past kids playing in the street and neighbors sitting on porches. We're just saving our little corner of it. That's all anyone can do, I agreed. But if everyone saved their corner, then the whole thing gets saved. She squeezed my hand. Block by block, engine by engine. Every morning, I still wake up in Grandpa's house, our house now, walk to work through a neighborhood that's slowly coming back to life. Spend my days building things, fixing things, teaching young mechanics how to hold a wrench properly and think like a problem solver. Every evening, I come home to Molly, who's usually already there, either working on her own projects in the workshop or making dinner in the kitchen that's become the command center for our expanding operation. We sit on the front porch sometimes, especially in summer, watching our city change one small victory at a time. The street where I once thought I'd lost everything has become the place where I found everything worth having. Late at night, when I can't sleep, I go out to the workshop, pick up Grandpa's old tools, read through his journal, work on whatever project is calling to me. Sometimes I can almost feel him there, nodding approval at what we built, proud of how his stubborn grandson finally figured out who he was supposed to be. Life is like an old engine, he wrote in one of his last entries. Sometimes you have to take it completely apart to understand how it really works. But when you put it back together, it runs better than it ever did before. He was right about that, but he left out the most important part. The best engines are built by teams. You need someone with the vision, someone with the skills, and someone stubborn enough to keep building when everyone else says it's impossible. Most importantly, you need to remember that dreams don't die. They just wait for the right person to pick them up. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you don't have to carry them alone. These days, when I pick up my wrench each morning, I'm building more than just engines. I'm building a life, a marriage, a business, a corner of a city that refuses to give up. And every piece that fits into place feels like a small act of rebellion against everyone who ever said it couldn't be done. Sometimes the best revenge really isn't revenge at all. It's building something so good, so real, so impossible to ignore that the people who doubted you become just a footnote in your success story. The engine's running smooth now. The neighborhood's coming back to life. The dream that started in my grandfather's journal has become a reality that employs dozens of people and proves that Detroit still knows how to make things that matter. And I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do, with exactly the right person by my side. That's not revenge. That's triumph. Every morning when I open the shop, turn on the radio, and start building something new, I remember what Grandpa always used to say. The best things in life are never new, Tommy. They're rescued, restored, given a second chance to be great. Turns out he wasn't just talking about engines. Sometimes, if you're brave enough to start over and stubborn enough to keep building, you discover that home was always there, waiting for you to stop running and start creating. That's the thing about Detroit. That's the thing about second chances. That's the thing about dreams that refuse to die. They're always possible. You just have to be willing to get your hands dirty.